Welcome to the Arab Show, the podcast that celebrates broker entrepreneurs and hands-on business leaders who are building freedom through skill, grit, and innovation. Today, we are diving into the world of change, management, and technology adoption with Cesar Viana Teague, a change management and enablement consultant who help leaders make AI and software adoption stick. Cesar is the creator of the APEE model, which stands for Analyze, Assess, Plan, Execute, Evaluate, and Exit, a practical framework that helps team move from resistance to results. He worked with CEOs and executives across the US and Europe, and and is active with the Institute of Coaching, Emselin Hospital, and Harvard Medical School affiliation. It's really a pleasure having you on the show, Cesar.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much. So, Cesar, what was it like growing up?
Growing up, well, I actually grew up in the Philippines.
Oh,
So I'm
amazing.
a multicultural person. I'm part Philippine, part South American, and part U.S. white. So
Yeah.
my mom and dad met in New York, and then they went back to the Philippines, where my mom had and my family and my grandma had a business, and that's how they like I said, where I was born, and so I grew up in an entrepreneurial family.
Environment.
Yeah, so that was the environment. So I actually used to help my grandmother count some of the money from the till at the end of the day, um, because the business of my grandma was actually a she had we had two businesses really. We had the a beauty salon. And so I like to joke people. I say I was born in a beauty salon, surrounded by women, beautiful women. But there was also an institute, really to empower women to move away from, the provinces, from the other parts, and to learn various skills in hair and beauty science and dressmaking and those sort of things. And eventually, a lot of them became entrepreneurs and opened up their own businesses, and such that my grandmother won the presidential award for doing that, empower women in the Philippines. That was back in the 70s. And so, yeah, that's the environment I grew up with. And I remember running around as a little kid. I think I must have been like 6 or 7, 8 years old, and I was really into carpentry at the time and painting. And so I went to the neighbor's house, and I would tell them that it would cost you 50 cents to paint that particular wall or window. And I remember I can still visualize standing there and telling them to paint it white so it would be, nice and cool and bright, because it was dark. You wanted it dark because it gets very hot. And I remember counting, how much that would be based on how many walls and windows and all that. And I can
Yeah.
still remember to this day standing in that little house counting that. Anyway, so and then then from there, I guess I just branched out into other areas in the sales and marketing space. That's really what I've been in for a while.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really amazing. I think it's just the fact that a whole lot of persons who got to do other bigger things later on, most of them have more like their roots related to more like a handy skill or more like a handy job being that they were able to kind of learn not just more like from the intellectual aspect of it, but the fact that while working with their hands, they could actually more like be able to predict things without needing any mathematical aspect of it to do those things. Because I was just imagining what the calculation was to be able to kind of being able to specify what quantity of paint is needed to get a particular space, though, which is more of intuitive owing to consistency compared to just showing up and assessing it. And it's really amazing. So, Cesar, let's start with your journey. What inspired you to focus on uh, change management and help your team adopt new technology successfully?
Yeah, so obviously I didn't grow up with technology. Right, considering the internet in the 90s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I moved into sales and marketing. So I actually went to school in London, to American school, and I started selling American jeans in Oxford Street in London, which is a famous street for shopping, etc. And I would work there in the summers to make money so I could travel. So I'd work for a few months and then I would take a month off and travel while I was on summer break from school. And I realized that I really enjoyed dealing with people. I enjoyed meeting with people and helping them. It's really I just went from there. My first I transferred here to the University of San Francisco for my undergrad, and then for my MBA here as well. And yeah, so I kind of like move. I went from in the sales and marketing space, I went from being an individual contributor to like a national sales and marketing manager, and then to a regional sales director and trainer. And as a trainer 18 years ago, when I started training other people, distributors, and that sort of thing, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed providing that support. And part of it is facilitation. There's the coaching aspect. There's training and coaching, facilitation, different parts of this enablement piece. And the word enablement didn't even come about until 2014. And so enablement is inherently part of change management, because more and more are realizing, you've seen the statistics, something like 70% or so, according to a McKinsey study, that 70% of change initiatives fail or don't succeed. However they define failure, not sure, but they don't succeed based on whatever their initial objectives were. And the pace of change has really accelerated, in addition to just certainly with AI and the adoption of that. And so there's a lot of challenges that come with the adoption, both internally in the company for themselves, and then if they're selling software, or whatever, cloud services or what have you, to another company, IT services, then you have the challenge of getting that company to adopt your particular solution, because if they don't, then then
The
you
art
can
of
find all
business.
kind of things go out of control. You have scope creep, or as a client of mine calls it, scope explosion. So your original SOW, or statement of work, expands quite a bit beyond what you had expected, and sometimes you have to bear the cost, and so it's become very costly. And you have a lot of resistance along the way. And so, the change management piece is really helping technology leaders and subject matter experts with enabling others to adopt and succeed in that, in the change. Because people don't really necessarily like change. Most don't. Just like the technology
Yeah.
change curve, where you have the early adopters, you have the general majority that start to adopt. They're on the middle of the bell curve, and then you have the laggards at the other end of the spectrum. Right? It's the same. It's no different. You have the people who go through change, but lots of questions come up in people's minds around that change. And so that's been the journey really around that. And that's what I'm working on these days, to help support and coach, and facilitate conversations around the change management. And, how do we do that? And you mentioned the model. So that's one of the things I came up with during my studies, when I went back to school in 2014 for 7 years towards my PhD in organizational leadership at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. So I came up with just different ideas, and started testing some things and playing with it. And so that's what I developed and what I'm doing today.
Wow, that was pretty really amazing. I think it's the fact that you were able to kind of come up with that, mean that change is something that not just is hardly for someone to actually adopt, but a whole lot of people even forget to fight it. To become, it's no longer a choice anymore. They just have to adapt, or else they're out of business. That's where a whole lot of persons come to accept it. So you actually created this model, the APEE model. Can you explain how it works and why it's effective for driving adoption?
Yeah, I think, what is that? Was it Darwin who said that it's the strongest in nature that survive, and then somebody else came along and said, "Well, actually, no, it's not the strongest. It's the one that can adapt that survive." right? And so that came on some years later, and
Yeah.
that kind of stuck at the back of my mind. And so I was thinking, okay, I'm a bit of a visual person, and I was reviewing different methods and methodologies and ideas as part of my research, right? And there's so much out there, and the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't
Yeah.
know, right? And it's like, wow. But then I visualized something as far as the model, and so I said, well, what do we really need? What is it that we really need to do to take a step back to make the change more of a success? And so I called it the strategic planning for change management. And it's not a change management model per se. I mean, there are other ones out there like ADCAR model from ProSci. There's the McKinsey 7S model. There's the Cotter 8-step. There's various other ones. Those are the main three I would say that are most popular. But that's the model itself. But you still need to take a step back and plan your work and work your plan. And so that's the strategic planning piece. And so that's where the APE model comes in and analyze and assess, right? Like you indicated, plan, execute, evaluate, and then you exit or evolve, as it were. And so before you do anything, you have to analyze and assess the situation in whatever is going on to see, okay, and when I say analyze and assess, I'm talking about like a SWOT analysis. So you are doing a SWOT: strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. You can even include others. There's a PESTLE, which is more the political, environmental, legal, technical, those other aspects too. Very wise to take a look at that. You also want to analyze and assess the culture of the company, and because that will inform the readiness and impact of the change. So, plus who's involved, who are the stakeholders, and you have to do stakeholder interviews. That's part of your analysis and assessment as well. And once after you've done all that, it will then inform your plan. And so when you go to planning, that's the next phase. You're really looking at what's your objectives, strategies, and tactics for this project. But I think the mistake a lot of people make in change management is they view it as pure training on the new tool. So we have a new tool. We're going to introduce a new CRM system, AI. We're going to have AI here in the customer service, or we want to apply it in the finance department, what have you. Um, and so the change piece is around how do we use this new tool? So how are we going to train people on this tool? That's how people refer to typically to change management around that. And what I'm saying is that it's a bit late by then to do proper change management. You need to take a step back and, like I said, analyze and assess the situation. What's the readiness? How is this going to be received? And then how are you going to communicate that change to the broader audience, internal or external? Because how you communicate that it's really more about the people beyond just the actual technology or the tool that we're training them on. So yes, it's important to do the training, but that comes a little bit later on in the execution piece. You still need to have your analyze and assess and planning piece, and that's where my model comes in as a strength to identify those and to plan properly, so that when you do execute, it becomes better received. There's less resistance, there's greater adoption, and increases the chance of succeeding. It's not perfect, nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
People don't like to change because there's questions going on. You've been through change, I've been through change. We're asking in the back of our minds, and we're even voicing it in certain instances as to, how is this going to affect me? What's in it for me? I have to do this when? In addition to my current workload, am I going to get paid more for this?
Yeah.
Um, all these questions that come up are typically not addressed. And so you have to take care of those and answer the why first and foremost. And that needs to come from the top, from the sponsor, the main leader, typically VP to C level, that needs to articulate the vision and mission for this change and why are we doing this. And once you've done, that's really the starting point. And that's where I come in to help the executives, the technology leaders, and SMEs with that, before even helping on the implementation piece, because if you haven't done that part right, it's gonna come back to bite you later on.
Amazing, amazing. I think the fact that the model just speak volumes to analyze, assess the situation, so you could actually plan on what and what you could actually do difference. It's very, very key. Being that you're working through the model from the problem perspective of what problem is it coming to solve? How do I assess, analyze the situation and plan towards it? Because despite the question in here, it's really a tough questions, being that uh, it a whole lot being that you're trying to see the end from the
Mm.
beginning and yeah, try to see through every problem, through every different way that your potential client might want to counter what you actually do, but the fact that you think towards it and you're able to counter them even before they even think of the problem, before they even think of how those things will not get to work, you already see them from your questions, being that you're able to kind of answer the tough question. It's really, really amazing. And yeah, it's really lovely way of looking at the model of business when it comes to change and everything, because not all change will be accepted. But seeing it from the perspective of planning towards it, it's very key and very important.
Yeah,
So you have
and
got,
you have to
so
you have to involve people earlier, like I said.
yeah,
That's the one takeaway from all this, really.
yeah,
If you were to ask me, is you gotta involve people a lot earlier during that change discussion. So you cannot show up as a leader
yeah,
and say, "Hey, Aro, we're going to implement this new tool tomorrow. Go and make it happen. Take care of it." No, execute it, or whatever. So you
yeah,
can't. Yeah, of course you can do that. That's easy, but that's not what authentic leader does. An authentic leader
wow,
is a little bit more transparent. It's more communicative, has a lot more emotional and cultural intelligence to be able to admit. And the ego comes in, easier said than done, but I realize you have to admit when you don't know. But that's where you involve people in designing the change. Meaning, when
mm,
you start the planning piece, you have to involve people in that, in setting the strategies and tactics, and in asking for feedback on how you're going to do this. Because the more voices you get for this, the more
mm,
acceptance you will get, because people will feel, oh, okay, well, I
yeah,
contributed to that. My voice was heard. I was acknowledged. It may not have been implemented, but I can still support it because at least I was asked to begin with.
yeah.
So that's what it's about. But most people will just go straight in. No, we don't have time to waste through this. Let's just execute on this right away. To start training on this too. We've already decided we're going to implement this CRM thing, and that's what we're going to run with.
Wow. Yeah,
No.
amazing. I was really about asking the question more like, what's the difference between leaders who drive change and those who delay it? But the fact that I just make reference of the leaders who actually get to involve their team in the making of decisions, not just make it autocratic in terms of just go do what I ask you to do without asking what their opinion is, what could be done differently. And I think this just speak Williams too. When it comes to driving change, most times you being as a leader simply means you wouldn't know it all. There might be some integral parts that just allow some numbers of persons be there while the decision is being made could actually be more like a game changer, being that they're not just seeing it from one eye's view. You have a team that's currently looking at it, and if you got to miss some points, your team will definitely capture it and you're able to kind of sort the problem other than just seeing it from one end where one person is just making the decisions. Sometimes it can be detached from the feelings, detached from what the how the operation work very well compared to when you have a team that's
Mm.
committed towards making that succeed. And it's really an amazing way of looking at things.
Yeah, you have to tap into your team. And if you
Yeah.
are a lower ego, confident person, and if you have a transformative leader approach, you will surround yourself with people. You're okay with surrounding yourself with people who are actually smarter than you.
Yeah.
That's why you hired them. But if you're not, then you would tend to be more of a transactional leader, and people you wouldn't. Don't be surprised if you just have people saying yes, yes men. They call them having
Yeah.
yes men. So I'm just saying yes to you. Okay, we'll go wrong with this. You know better. boss, you know better, we'll go over that. And there are instances where the boss would know better. Now, I'm not saying they don't.
Yeah.
It's just that you're not coming across as the know-it-all, and you're not
Yeah.
coming, and you're welcoming, you're creating the environment so it's safe for people to voice their opinion, and you are actually listening. And I'm talking about active listening, not just passive listening, but you're providing some active listening to the people, stating what they just indicated, asking for feedback, etc. And therefore, you're going to come up with better ideas, right? And but again, you have to spend more time, I think, considering what is the challenges for that. I think it was Einstein who said that if you have X amount of time, you want to spend 90% of it determining the actual problem, understanding
Yeah.
the problem, and only 5 to 10% of it actually coming up with a solution, right? And
True.
so, but most just want to accelerate straight into this because we want it done yesterday, and then we wonder why later on things will backfire. So I'm here to help it not backfire. I'm here to help it fire on all 12 cylinders.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you very much, Caesar.
Thank you.
So fear and resistance are natural during big change. What communication strategy helped turn resistance into buy-in?
Yes, because look, I was mentioning earlier, the fear and resistance pop in because of the fact that it has not been communicated.
Mm.
The why and the what's in it for me as an employee or even as a client has not been communicated thoroughly enough or effectively enough or both. So there has to be a proper cadence of communication, the frequency as well, and what is the strategic messaging that you're providing around that. Are you coming across, like I said, as transparent, and you're actively sharing information versus keeping it cards close to your chest and not wanting to share too much for fear of something might happen? um, no. And so you have to reduce that fear and resistance by, in essence, over communicating and really
Mm.
involving people earlier on. But it's kind of harder to do that later on because there are instances where it's too late almost to try to do that. Um, Unless you come back and apologize and say, you know what, we didn't handle this correctly the first time around, and let's give it another shot. Really, I would appreciate your support on this. Here's what we learned. We did well. Here's what we learned and we didn't do well. So we'd really love your feedback on this as the next step. I have office hours to take care of this, or my chief of staff or whoever it is has office hours to handle this. Let's get some feedback and then let's run with this and let's make this work the next time around. That's literally the approach and style that you have to take in the communication side to reduce that fear and resistance.
Yeah, amazing, amazing, amazing. I think the fact that you make reference of communication, over communicate is very, very key. Being that when a team is totally more like they know what and what's in terms of what the product entails, in terms of what the technology entails, in terms of every more like every bias they have is being cleared owing to communications. Even if there's pressure in the team, there's a whole lot to get done. There's still going to
Mm.
be a willingness to actually change things, a willingness to work, a willingness to actually more like offer in their all toward bringing the desired change compared to when there's miscommunications from what to expect. Because then they are not going to see what change they could actually make in the big system compared to when they're being
Mm.
carried along and they are well communicated to. It's really an amazing way of looking at it.
Mm.
So for a small, medium-sized business, what is one simple first step to start managing change more intentionally?
Sorry, for a small, medium-sized business, sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, what is a
Uh,
simple first step to start managing change
ah,
more
Yeah, well, in a small,
intentionally?
medium-sized business, I mean, usually you have to have enough people to do that. It's easier, of course, with less people. If
Yeah.
you're talking about an enterprise with 10 to 1,000 employees or more, it becomes a lot harder to turn that aircraft carrier around. It's going to take a lot longer because there's more staff. A lot easier in a small medium business to do things quicker. And so again, the first step is that's why I have the model as the AP triple E model,
Yeah.
is you literally starting with your analyze and assess piece to determine where are we. What it's like if you want to go to the airport, you put into your Google Maps where you want to go. You just need to put your starting point because you can be really, really efficient in what you're doing, meaning you can be going at 100 miles an hour because you're going to be making it soon much faster to the airport. But you could be totally ineffective because you're going in the wrong direction to get to the airport. So you're going faster in the wrong way. So you really have to start determining where am I? Again, that analysis piece, what are the strengths we have, resources, et cetera, that are going on that we have to work with, and what can we build on, and then go from there. And that's where literally that's where the work is. It's in helping people to understand that and to dig for that and to right, definitely to build your plan with that information.
Wow, amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Caesar. So you have worked across our industries and continents. Do cultural differences affect how change is received or led?
Yes, and so I mentioned earlier, I'm part Asian, part Latino, all right, and part American, white, in a sense, and I'm not saying discriminating any of those. I'm all of them. It just depends on the culture. Like in the U.S., if you study some cultures, you'll see the U.S. is they are a risk-prone culture. That's why a lot of innovation happens here.
Happen.
A lot of companies around the world come here to also sell their products and services because people here are more open to trying new things. They are willing to take risks. It's a very individualistic society, and so yes, your question is very loaded. I mean, you could spend a whole session just talking about that. Others are not. Other Asian cultures, which I was, they want to have that direction. They take direction from their leaders, and some of them may not be comfortable sharing their opinions if you ask them for it. Some of them might even think that you're not a capable leader because you're asking for opinions. So it's very interesting how that emerges. So you have to take that into consideration as part of the analysis and assessment of the culture of your company and the society you're operating in to determine the impact and change readiness of your business. And so, yeah, it's an excellent question, but it's a loaded one.
Wow, wow, amazing. I think the fact that you just make reference of different culture have the way they perceive change, and some are risk taker, while some are reserved or without willing to offer their opinion. I think it's very, very key, especially when you're designing some change that is location specific or a particular area specific, and also when it's generally through the whole world. I think a whole lot of things have to be put in consideration in
Yeah.
getting it right and in getting it to a larger audience. And I think this really speaks volume. So, what are some of the red flags that shows that roll out need to be rescued, and how do you approach fixing it?
Yeah, I mentioned some of them already, right? So the
Yeah.
first, the biggest one is what I said at the start of our call is that don't look at change as just a pure training event for training on the new technology, whatever it might be. And so it's not that, right? And so it is that, but that comes later on. So that's the biggest flag for that. And also is identifying who are the key stakeholders. You have your sponsor. The sponsor is the main C-level person that's driving all of this, and you have to identify the stakeholders. A really important point to get right, where you're making sure that you've touched all the key folks that will be affected by this, um, and certainly including the line leaders. And so because they're the ones in the field that's going to also execute on it. So you have to make sure you're touching all the right people and that you're involving the right stakeholders in your change plan. And so those are a couple of the major flags to take into consideration. And then the cadence and frequency of your communication and your meetings to determine, okay, where are we? Because that's the evaluate piece, what I've done, what's working, what isn't working, and then making the necessary adjustments monthly, quarterly, and certainly annually, because when you're doing an ERP rollout, that usually takes a year or two just to roll out an enterprise resource planning system effectively, especially in a bigger organization. So those are some of the key things that we want to be taking a look at and watch out for.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Caesar.
Mhm.
So you emphasize clear communication, cadence. What does a healthy communication rhymes look like during a big transition?
Uh, what does a what kind of communication? Sorry, what was the question
Okay,
again?
what does a healthy communication ring rhymes I mean, read look like during a big transition?
Uh, So as far as the type of communication, so I mean you have different forms of the communication that we have to consider, right? And so again, depending on the culture of the company, what are they used to? But we have the basic tools, of course. We know that we have email, of course. But some companies may have Slack, they may have Teams, right? So chats. And so those are some other ways to communicate certain messages on there. Those are more what's called lean forms of communication. You also have to include rich forms of communication, meaning the ones where you have more engagement, such as a webinar, an online meeting, live meeting. You have the all hands meeting, right? Or you have an offsite, or a town hall. These are other types of forms of communication that one can add into the mix to increase the chance of gaining buy-in from everybody around this change, and so making sure that everybody feels that they're informed and that they are respected because of that communication cadence and frequency thereof.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thanks for that, Caesar.
Mm.
Okay, I'd like to ask this for or end the conversation. So you mentioned combining method like Adka, Kota, and McKinsey, 7X. So how do you decide which one fit particular for a particular situation?
Very carefully. So usually we decide this earlier on in the analysis and assessment.
Yeah,
Once you've done that, that would be part of that analysis. And say which model, given the complexity of our change and the scope of the change, which would of course be part of the complexity, and the time frame that we have, then we want to take a look to see which of these makes the most sense to use. And we would just certainly, part of what I do is I review all those. I can make some recommendations, but I usually ask the folks themselves to decide which one would make sense for them, because obviously the executives and stakeholders know their business and company and culture better than myself or anybody else, right? So I'm just there to support them with
yeah,
some of the knowledge, and then say, okay, here's some options. See which one, sleep on it, and then certainly I would facilitate the conversation around the differences between those three and which one could potentially make sense for them. But I'm not going to show up and tell them you got to use this. That's not my style. My style is more of a coaching role in that instance, where I'm providing the information and then letting them decide which one is going to work for them. Because again, once you decide on that yourself, you have more buy-in, and right, you're more engaged in
yeah,
it because you're the one that made the decision.
yeah. Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thanks for
Mm.
that. So finally, for leaders listening today, what is one action they can take this week to start creating change that stick, and where can they connect with you for support?
Sure, yeah. So I actually have a free assessment. That's the Tech Change Readiness Assessment, and it is on my website. My website is changeisgood.io,
Wow.
right? So www.changeisgood.io. And there's a free assessment there you can take. You can rate yourself on 5 dimensions, as a leader in terms of your influence and etc. So you can take a look at that, score yourself, see where you are, what your strengths are, see where there might be some gaps, and then connect with me and happy to chat about it. And also on LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So welcome to connect with me there, Cesar Viana Teague, and message me, and that would be a good way to follow up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cesar. I'm very glad we're able to have this conversation. I think it just speaks volumes to the fact that change can be something that we need to really look into it critically, especially when we're creating products that is going to change the way people perceive things and the way people actually more like organize their work and team. Having to adopt that particular model, which is more like analyze access situations and plan, is very, very key towards more like creating a product or something like a system that actually work, that actually
Mm,
stick, that speak volumes to our team. And even
mm,
at the end of the day, that yeah, at least stand the test of time for a bit. Yeah, compared to the ones that just at the end of the day wouldn't last, being that people were not carried along and there was no correct because there was no concrete planning when it was being carried out. Yeah, thanks for this
right.
conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thank you for breaking down change management into such clear, actionable insight. To everyone listening, remember, change doesn't have to be chaotic. With the right mindsets, communications, and plan, your team can turn destruction into a real result. You can grab Caesar Tech Change Readiness Kit and book for free 20-minute consult at changeisgood.io. A great first step towards making change stick. Until next
Mm.
time, keep building, keep adopting, and keep leading with purpose. I'm Benaya, the host of the Arrow Benaya Show. And once again, it's really a pleasure having you on the show. See you.
Thank you so much.